Hey, it's Brett here, and I'm going to do something new. The last few years I've been doing coding. That's partly why I didn't do YouTube as much. And lately I've been writing some guitar books about sort of how to write songs and things like that. And one thing that really helped me when I was learning was having constraints. So one of my teachers said, why don't you go, because I was asking how to write songs, he said something like, why don't you go only use GCD chords? And for some reason, when he gave me a constraint, it really unlocked the songwriting process for me. And so I used to do something where I would pick a key and then I would just make sure just to kind of try all these different chord combinations in the key. So that got me thinking it'd be kind of nice to have a program that just outputs that. And so last night I wrote a little program. It's pretty simple if you're a coder, but if you're not, it might look kind of crazy. But I figured I would show the program in like the actual code, which is not very much, and then actually use it. And if anybody wants the code, I can link to it, but I'm going to keep adding to it. I'll explain sort of where I see this program going. So right now I'll run it, and then I'll explain sort of what's happening. So this is a terminal window, and in the terminal window, you can run the commands on your Mac, which normally you, or your PC, you have something different a little bit, but you can run commands. And here I'm just running, I'm going to use the language, basically the platform Ruby to execute this file. And this is what's going to do. So it output the name of the key. I put here is a command line argument. This is I'm saying I'm going to pass the key of C in here, and then it outputs some chord progressions. And I'll show you one more time. I think the most important keys on guitar are C, A, G, E, D. You can see here. I'll move it up. Now it has the keys of C, A, G, E, D. But every time I run this, I'll run it a few times with the key of C. Every time I run it, you're going to notice it outputs something different. And that's kind of the fun of it. And something else I did here is I put the Roman numerals. These are the chord tones. And this is how I think about chord progressions. And the guitar books I'm working on, I'm really making sure early on to introduce that idea, because basically what it does is it allows you to switch keys later and see like the general pattern of music. So basically I'm gonna run this later with C. I'll just pick a key. I'll probably do, I don't know, maybe I'll do C because it's kind of easy. All right, so here's the program. This is in a text editor called Sublime Text. It's a pretty common one, and basically what you need for a Ruby file is, for a Ruby program, is just a file with some code in it, and then you can get more and more complicated over time. So the first thing I did is I just kind of wrote out what I wanted the first version to have. I actually had more, and then I kind of broke it up. So I'm going to kind of explain this, and then I'll show the code. So for version 1, I was thinking, well, I just basically want what you see over here, like simple chords. And this format kind of emerged as I went, but I knew I didn't want to have like sus chords and 7 chords and stuff, because that would add a lot of complexity. So basically I knew, well, I'm going to need to have the natural notes, and then I'm going to need to have all 12 notes. So I need to have some notes in my program. And then I need to have the concept of the major scale programmed in there. And then I'm going to need to have the chords for the scale. And then asking for the scale, I just did as a command line. And then I'm going to need some way to display it and also to structure it. So like do something with the chords that I generated. And this is actually configurable. I'll show in a minute, like how many chords can be the maximum for each part. And then for version 2, I just kind of thought, well, what would I like to do next? Because I think I'll expand this a little bit. I think it'd be interesting to have like more variety of chords. Because right now this is just basic chords, major, minor, diminished. And I actually have diminished turned off because diminished, I barely ever use it. And then later I was thinking, well, like there could be more and more rules to kind of have smarter songwriting. So, I mean, one approach to this program is there's 12 keys in music. I could have just, typed out all of the possible combinations in some sort of a data structure and then just like randomized it. That would work. But down the line, I mean, first of all, that's not really programming. It is, but it's not very fun, and everything's hard-coded. But also, I just wanted to kind of do this because it seemed fun, and then I can build on these little pieces later. So the first thing you'll notice up on top, I have this thing require pry. This is just a little tool. And if I do more videos about this, I'll go more into how to use it. I'm going to make this kind of quick. These require relative statements. These are just requiring some files instead of putting all the code in this single file. So I have a config file, which is, I say you can turn debug on or off. I'll demonstrate that in a second. This I don't need anymore. This diminished, you can turn true or false to allow a diminished chord. And number of chords per part is like the maximum. And then these are just, this is called a hash. This is just a map because I wanted to be able to have the Roman numerals. So it's basically saying like display 1 is this and 2 is this. So let me actually demonstrate these configs really quick. So if I change this to true, then somewhere in my program I have a bunch of debug statements that will, now they will actually like run, like print something to the screen. So over here now, watch this. It's gonna be it's gonna have a lot more output. So see, now it says generating the natural notes. So the first thing it does is it generates the natural notes. Then it generates all the notes. So it puts and it only does sharps right now because I wanted to keep it simpler, not do the flats also. So notice the only thing there is between B and C and E and F, there's no sharp. Otherwise, there's always a sharp added. And then since the key is C, it's going to generate a C major scale. And the way that I do it, you can actually see here. I start on C, and then I programmed in the pattern of major scale, which is just whole, whole, half, whole, half. So a whole step is 2 half steps. That's what this means. So it's going whole. So it says, so my program is starting on C, and then it's going like to the next note, and then the next note. And then it stops, and then it will do the next whole step. It will move from D to D sharp, D to E, and it goes through, and then here it's going to move 1 step. So it goes through, and the reason I did that is I only have each note just like once in a list, and then when it gets to the end, it needs to move back to the beginning. Because there's many other ways that could have been done, but I just went like step by step. And let me turn diminished on. Let's see if this works. I think it should. Yeah, here we go. So now it has a diminished chord in there. I realized that after I wrote it because I originally had diminished, and I'm like, I can't play these these progressions with diminished. I mean, I know how to do it. It just wouldn't sound good. All right, so turn diminished back off. Let me turn this back off because there's a lot of stuff. And then let's see if this works. I think it does. Let's see if I do it to 1. The number of chords per part. Whoops. Yeah, so now every part can only have 1 chord, which could be kind of interesting. They still change each time. And you could change these Roman numerals. Like I could do a smiley face. It should work. Right here, here's a smiley face. So these are just like, this is just saying when you get the number 1, put this. In the case where I'm using Roman numerals. All right, so hopefully program kind of makes sense. It also, there's these different parts: intro, verse, chorus, bridge, outro. So those are like all the parts you could have in a song. So what I was thinking is like maybe you would only take a couple of these. Sometimes there's variation in songs where you could have like different, maybe 2 different intro parts and then like a few bridges throughout the song, or variations, and like then it kind of gets hard to even know what to name stuff. But this is like the common structure. All right, so here's the program, and basically, if anybody's curious, I could actually go really slow through this later. But this first one, what it's saying is to basically go from A to G, and then save those unique letters. So this is a range from A to G. So I get from A to G because that's all the notes in music. And then here, there's a little bit of logic to just say, if the note is B or E, then we're not going to add a sharp after it. Otherwise, we add sharps. And I probably could have written this in a simpler way, a shorter way, but I was actually keeping in mind maybe somebody would want to look at this who's new to coding. Because I'm starting to think it'd be kind of fun to also teach coding eventually. So this is a more straightforward way of writing it. And this weird looking thing right here, this is just to avoid every time I call this stuff, it just executes this once. Since this only needs to be done once, that's basically what this is doing. So instead of having to call that every time, the same code, and it's just kind of a good habit when because if you think about it, I only need the natural notes and all the notes like when the program first starts. And then for the next bit, and here you can see, like I say, if the debug is turned on, this means if it's true, if debug is true, then, output all these put statements that you see, that's where basically what I'm doing for logging right now. There's more sophisticated ways to do it, but that was just a quick way to do it. And then here, what I'm doing for the major scale is I'm creating a new array, and I'm going to save the notes. And then what I'm saying is start. I basically figure out inside of all of the notes, I find where to start based on the root note that is set. Like over here, when I pass in a note, that's the root note of the scale that I want. And then it finds where to start in all of the notes that I made, that has 12 notes. Just it goes A up through G, but it has the sharps. So basically here I'm saying find out where the root note is in that. And then what we're going to do is go through, this is kind of the heart of the logic here, here's the pattern for a major scale: whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. So later, actually, what I could do, if I want to have other types of scales, I could get the scale patterns and I could substitute this in. I can make this a variable. So like this could become scale pattern, and this code would still work. So that's kind of, sometimes when you're coding, you think ahead a little bit. So this seemed like a reasonable way to do it. And these would stay the same. That's always true, a whole and half. A whole step in music has 2 notes and a half has 1. And then basically what I'm doing is I'm moving through the list. So you could see like I output what the current note is, and then I save, and then I basically save the note. But then at the end, I determine like how far to go next. And if I get to the end of the array of notes, then I loop back around to the beginning. I start at 0. So that might be a little bit confusing, but basically think about like a straight line of notes, like the scale, and like what would you do when you got to the end? So let's say you're starting on C, because you have to loop back around the little line. So I'm basically just writing logic to detect if there's an end, and then go to the beginning and then keep going according to these patterns here. And then this part is kind of, there might be a more clever way to do this, but in a way that like some of this is just like whole, whole, half, whole, whole, half. That's just knowledge from music theory. And same thing here, like the 1, 4, 5 chords, the 2, 3, 6, the 1, 4, 5 chords are major. The 2, 3, 6 are minor. and the 7 is diminished. So actually you could write like a better program just to pull all chords out, but to actually get the names in there, that's the part where you kind of need code like this. That's just a little bit clunky. There's probably a better way to do it, but and then so at this point when I have the basic chords for, I export data that is in this form. And actually, why don't I do this? So I'm going to put a binding.pry statement in here. I mentioned this thing pry. And what's useful about this is just a debugger. So right now I'm kind of not being clear because I need to demonstrate this. So let's say I run the program again. Watch what's going to happen this time. I don't know why it's taking so long to run. This program's tiny. So notice here, there's this on line 100. It stopped right at this point. And then what I want to show you is, well, what was, you can type these variables now and you can see what they are. So if I do chords for scale, and you can see the structure here. This is kind of what I was wanting to demonstrate. So let's see if I type chords, if it's a little bit clearer. Yeah, so basically this is the data structure I was talking about, like right from this step. And this has a lot of data that later I'm kind of like, I want to have all this data. So like this is the chords for the scale. The scale is C major. So there's a few different patterns here. There's this one, like there's a few structures. This one, there should be 7 of these little structures because there's 7 notes in a major scale. So this says like the first note, the scale letter is C, the chord type is major. The chord label is nothing because major chords have nothing after them. And then the chord number is Roman numeral 1. It's the 1 chord. And then the 2 chord has the second note is D. It's minor. The label is M, and then the chord number is 2, and usually it's lowercase if it's minor. And then it keeps going like that. And then the next thing I'm doing is with this code right here, I'm basically just pulling out. This is just saying pull out just a couple pieces. I'm pulling out scale letter with the chord label. So here you can see I'm pulling out little pieces from these structures. I'm pulling out the letter and the number, and then and the label. Sorry, so letter, label. So like you could check on this one, right? Like we just looked at. So it's going letter, label, and number. So letter, D, label, and number. And I just thought down the road I might want to like display all this data differently, like, and this would be because sometimes I like to have like the scale with the chords and stuff like that, and like if I just exported it as this right away, I wouldn't be able to do different things with that data. All right, because that part's kind of confusing what's going on. So now if I type exit, the program will keep going and then gets to the end. And then what I do once I have those chords, so at this point, song parts with chords, I want to adjust the chords. Again, I would have that data if I wanted to do fancier stuff with down the road. But then I was thinking, well, what are the parts that I want? And this could be configurable later too. Like you could let people choose their own part structure, you know? This could be a variable. So maybe they could have intro, verse, and then they would want verse 2. And then my program would, like I could do verse 2. And later you could make this something they could change easier. So now there's a verse 2. And then also this number could be whatever you want, the amount. Like above 8 just would seem crazy. Usually like I put 6 because that's kind of really 4 chords is probably the typical chord progression, but you could maybe see 6. And okay, so then what I did is it's saying we have all these parts, so then it's going through each of these parts and it is sampling the chords. So here it's saying go from 1 chord up to whatever number you configured, number of chords per part. So that could be 1, which would mean 1, but it could be like 1 to 8. So that many times, what we want to do is we're going to pick a random number from there. So it could be like, let's say 1 to 8. You could pick 1 or 4 or 8. That's what this is saying. And that many times, then we're going to go through and we're going to pick random chords from the possible list. So at that point, we have everything, but then the last step was to display it here. And so that's what this does. These put statements just output to the screen. And then down at the very bottom right here, this argv is whatever I type after here. That is what argv is going to be. So watch, if I put another binding.pry, you can see argv. That time it was caged, and it comes through as an array. That's what that thing is. If I just put CA, then it just CA comes through, and basically that's just called an array. It's like a list that's an ordered list. So it's always going to stay in that order. I mean, you could do stuff to it. And then for each of those, I'm running the code here. Like this is the big kind of like kicker method that actually does stuff. And eventually, I need to move this somewhere else and whatever. So for the next steps, I mentioned I want to do moods. So after I wrote this program, I started thinking about the next step, which would be like, well, how would you code like the moods in music? Like not the modes, but the mood. Because when I'm writing a song, I do think about like, well, what do I want this mood to be? Like, is this song going to be like really, really happy? Then I'm going to use probably GCD and like fast tempo, which actually later I could maybe even have tempo suggestions or something. But in terms of chords, like if I want to make a really miserable sounding song, then it needs to have all minor and diminished probably. Like a sad, depressing song could have a major in there. I can actually make major chords sound sad. And then just a sad song would have more minor. Remember, there's 3 major and 3 minor in every key. And then a mix is just like in the middle. Happy would have more major. Bright, even less minor. It's a 3 to 1. Then campfire, like I was thinking like what's a word for like really happy guitar music? I think of people around a campfire. And then the other thing is, since the chords are random, like let's say you picked like this one. You're trying to make a depressing song with this program, but for some reason the major chord just kept popping up. Like it's possible that within this program the major chord could pop up in a lot of spots. Well, that wouldn't really work because the major chord could appear in a depressing song, but if it's like the first and last chord of each part, that's going to sound pretty happy. So what I'm thinking is I'm going to need to have a lot of rules, and this is where the program could really get crazy, is thinking of these kind of rules. So for a depressing song, it needs to, 2 of the parts need to start with the minor chord. So that's what this means. Like start with, like I'm thinking 2 of the parts. So like the verse and the chorus or the intro or whatever need to start with minor. That would at least get it more in the ballpark of being a depressing song. And then like a mix song, like if the mood's gonna be mixed, then probably 1 part needs to start with major and 1 with minor. And And then like Campfire, like all the chords are major, so I didn't need any rules. And same thing with Miserable. Those are the extremes. So like those rules could get more interesting over time, and then the really interesting mood logic would happen more for other types of moods. Like to me, when I hear, like let's say I want to make fake yoga music, like for a yoga studio, I would use a lot of like sus2 and sort of open sounding chords. If I want to make like a rock song, you could use power chords and sus4 chord. Usually sounds pretty rock. And there's like different things like that, different tricks. So what could get really interesting is to have other moods where then like the chords that are suggested would actually fit that mood more. So like sus chords or 7 chords. So for like jazz, like everything needs to be a 7. You could start putting diminished in there because that's used all the time in jazz music. Or like punk, it would be just all power chords. So anyway, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run this. And I think what I'll do actually is I'll run it CAGED. And I'll just pick one out of those that looks nice. And what I'm thinking is down the road, I could actually I think in making this into a website, and then people could use this and like export PDFs. And maybe I can like make this part of, because I'm trying to help people be more creative. I guess that's my real goal with what I've been thinking lately. This could be a kind of an interesting project. Whoops. Let me get rid of that binding.pry. It's kind of anticlimactic to end on that. All right. I think my computer's got a lot of stuff going on, maybe because I'm running this screencasting software. It shouldn't take that long. All right, so here's C, A, G, E, D are like the most common keys. And I'm just gonna glance at this. Like this song does not look fun. There's too many chords. Oh, I also need to get rid of verse 2 though. I don't want to have verse 2 in there. And then the other thing is, actually 6 is kind of interesting. That would be a kind of a challenge to think of as how to use 6 chords, but it wouldn't be like 8 would be out of control in my opinion. This one in E is kind of interesting, but it doesn't have enough E in it. Actually, it does. This one's interesting to me because the intro doesn't have E in it. Like I've never written a song that doesn't have, usually it doesn't have the 1 chord. Like it doesn't have the 1 chord in predictable places. This one's kind of interesting. Let's see the C major one. This would be weird because it doesn't have C in the chorus. That would sound kind of depressing. The verse would sound... This is kind of interesting too. I don't really feel like playing an A. G. I think E and C are pretty interesting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just play those 2 chord progressions and then see which one appeals to me more. But like both of those are like define what I normally would do. Like especially the one in E. So I think I'm leaning to that, but if it's not working, I might try the C one. And what I'll do is I'll paste this on the screen when I make my little video next. So hope this was interesting, and maybe some people that watch this that are into music will be like interested in coding or thinking about it. And I just enjoy teaching. I used to teach writing and math, and I just enjoy actually teaching in itself. I enjoy teaching guitar most because I've played guitar for so long, but something I've been thinking about is maybe teaching coding eventually, but we'll see. So hope this was interesting to some people, and I will make a song next.